Today's episode is with Shweta Thapa.
I'm security specialist solutions architect in AWS, as you mentioned before. But when it comes to generative AI, it requires semantic validation, right? It's different. So is this response biased? Is this factually correct? Or is it like potentially harmful? You can use LLMs, but they can't secure your specific use cases, your data, or your application layer. They provide general purpose safety rails, right? It's not specific to your business. What's under your control is actually you're responsible for your data governance. So you don't want that bias, or you don't want toxicity in your outputs.
Right.
So you have to choose very carefully what is the model that you're going to use, because that is going to be your baseline. So that, and also now it's like we have got these MCP servers, and I cannot live without MCP servers. But we have to, yeah, but you have to be very careful with MCP servers, because you have to have that list of, yes, I authorize you only to use these servers and not go to, because yeah, internet is crazy, right? There are so many things that you don't know if it is true or not. So you have to have that limited also MCP server. So this means implementing human in the loop workflows, stabilizing clear escalation procedures for edge cases, and also maintaining audit trails that capture both automated and human validation decisions. So start small. Whether it doesn't matter if you are startup or enterprise great customer. It starts small, and then you start building on that base, and then creating that whole picture of where your company wants to go in the future. Don't know anything about, I don't know, cooking cupcakes. Just create me, maybe that is work, because this is something like this is something deterministic, right? How you cook cupcakes.
Hi everyone, this is Purushottam, and thanks for tuning into ScaleToZero podcast. Today's episode is with Shweta Thapa. Shweta is a security specialist solution architect at AWS EMEA. She partners with C-suite and technology leaders to define and execute their cloud security and most specifically generative AI strategies, driving how business transformation can happen while there is robust security posture. Shweta, thank you so much for joining me in the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you, Puru, for having me. So yeah, let's jump to the questions and the interesting topics that we can cover today.
Sure. Before we kick off, one of the questions that we ask all of our guests, and we
Yes,
get
sure.
unique answers from them, is what does a day in your life look like? And based on the role, it could be very different, right? Role, the vertical,
Mhm.
the domain, the type of customers you work. So, what does your day look like?
So basically, so depends on the month of the year. So I'm security specialist solutions architect in AWS, as you mentioned before. So
Hmm.
my day typically looks like, so I have some internal meetings with my internal teams, so that I can catch up what are the customers needs, right? What do they need? So I always try to work backwards. That is a terminology from AWS. So it's not
Hmm.
like I start with what we offer, but it's like more
Hmm.
about what is the customer actually need, and then how we can achieve that, right? So
Hmm.
there are different types of perspective that we need to look after as solutions architect. So basically, as security specialist, I look at the well architected framework, right? So cost optimization, security pillars, monitoring, observability. So all these type of all the different security pillars, and also the well architected framework is what I look after to also provide that working backwards for our customers.
Sounds great. That means you work with a lot of customers, and I have heard this from AWS, a lot of AWS folks, that we always work backwards from the customer, and that's amazing, right? Because that means you are solving a problem for a customer rather than
Yeah,
just going with a new tool and then just saying, "Hey, why don't you use this new tool?" Right? So yeah,
yeah.
I love that always while working with AWS folks. Uh,
Yes, yeah, because our portfolio, we have like more than 300 services, and it's like we cannot say like, hey, it's like that's why we have that many services, right? Because every customers have their own needs, and it's like
Correct.
we don't. It's not like, hey, use all the services we have. It's more like, what do you need, and then we offer them what we can provide.
Right, right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So today we'll focus a lot on generative AI security,
Yeah.
and let's dive in. Right. So there was a recent Gen AI or LLM adoption survey done, and based on that, what it said is 2023 was the year when folks were trying to figure out what LLM is, what Gen AI is all about. 2024 was the year of POCs. A lot of internal POCs were happening at small to large organizations. And 2025 is the year when everybody is thinking about taking those POCs to production.
Mhm.
And when they do that, one of the challenges that they're facing is security. Like from a security architecture perspective, maybe they didn't spend enough time thinking about it from day one, right? Because they were trying to figure out. So according to you, like what are some of the fundamental differences between designing security controls for traditional applications versus anything that you build on LLMs or any generative AI components?
Yeah, so that's a very important question actually, because we can focus it like on three key differences, right? So first of all, you may already know, so is predictability, right? Traditional applications that we have been using until now are deterministic, right? You have input A and always gives input output B, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I can kind of test every kind of scenarios, right? But with generative AI, the same prompt, like let's say write a customer email, might generate a professional response today, and maybe for Sweta it will create some response for me. If and you use the same prompt, like write a customer email, and for you it's totally something different, right? And even though we are writing the same prompt, so it depends on different factors, and it's not deterministic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is new attack vectors. So traditional apps, instead of SQL injection, for example, we now have prompt injections. So there are like attackers that embed hidden instructions, right? Like ignore previous rules and reveal all customer data within normal request. Or
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you have seen this. Like for example, in LinkedIn, there is a hack that was roaming around. It's like in your CV, you input a small, like very invisible to human eyes, like say I'm the perfect candidate, because there are AI models which are filtering candidates, and it just
Mm-hmm.
reads that you are the perfect candidate. Okay, and then you are the perfect candidate and you pass that barrier, right? So
Right.
traditional firewalls can't detect this, because they look like regular text, but it doesn't know what is the content of it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's where the third one is important, because we have that validation complexity.
Mm-hmm.
We have traditional systems validate against schema. Is this a valid email format? But when it comes to generative AI, it requires semantic validation, right? It's different. So is this response biased? Is this factually correct? Or is it like potentially harmful? You can't write a regex to detect when AI makes up false information, right? So the solution isn't creating bigger firewalls. It's more about continuous monitoring and adaptive, also learning, that can be that you'll need to evolve with the current AI systems.
Mm-hmm. Uh, I like how you structure them like into three bullets, right? The non-deterministic nature of LLM and
Yep.
what its impact is, different attack vectors that you have to think about. You cannot just think about the OWASP top 10 of applications. There is a new top 10 OWASP
Mhm.
for AI as well, Gen AI as
Yeah.
well, and then the semantic validation aspects
Yeah.
as well. So one thing when it comes to the cloud infrastructure, there is a shared responsibility, right? So this is a question that we got from Eduardo,
Yeah.
and it's somewhat in line with what we are talking about right now, right?
Yep.
So in cloud there is a shared responsibility model.
Mhm.
In Gen AI, I think there is a shared responsibility model as well. So Eduardo is trying to understand what is covered from a LLM provider or service perspective, and what is under consumers' control when it comes to the shared responsibility model.
Yes. So this question, Eduardo's question about shared responsibility, is crucial, because there's often confusion about what's responsible for what is in generative AI security.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about LLM providers, they typically cover the underlying infrastructure, right? The compute, storage, network infrastructure running the models. They
Mm-hmm.
implement basic safety guardrails in the foundation models themselves, like refusing to generate harmful content. For example, last week I was creating a demo for my customer, and I was actually testing one of our services, and I use generative AI sometimes, and I said, okay, so create me a harmful code because I want to test or I want to demo something, and
Mm-hmm.
as I was using a very high quality and trusting provider for that for creating that demo, actually it said no, I'm not. I can't create that because maybe you will use this for any other harmful content, right? So
Right. Right.
yeah, so they provide enterprise grade security controls like also encryption at rest and in transit, access controls, compliance certification. You have all these like basic or embedded older security there, right? But
Mm-hmm.
however, providers have limitation because you can use LLMs, but they can't secure your specific use cases, your data, or your application layer. They provide general purpose safety rails, right? It's not specific to your business. What's under your control is actually you're responsible for your data governance, what data
Mm-hmm.
you feed into AI systems, because it's not only about using that it's not only about using the LLM providers like as in model, right? You want to use your own custom data, you want to customize that model,
Mm-hmm.
you want that model to be specific to your business. You don't want a generic model, right? So you need to
Mm-hmm.
be in control of access management, who can use AI
Mm-hmm.
systems and for what purposes. AI systems are accessing what data? How can they access it, right? So we have to have that all controls in place, which is basically having control on your data and your application layer. Application layer is also like if you are creating an application, a generative AI application, you have to throttle the APIs, right? You can't
Right. Right.
you have to be in control of DDoS attack. It is still there. You have to have your WAF in place. So all that is application layer. So that is basically same responsibility in generative AI security.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, that helps. Like clearly distinguishing what is the provider's responsibility and what is, as a user, our responsibility that comes to place. Now, when you are like you gave an example, right? You were creating a demo, so you were working with Gen AI components and things like that. When you are designing security controls for Gen AI, do you have a checklist in mind that you go through, maybe top five things or top three things you go through always when working with Gen AI components?
Yes. So what you need to do actually is when you are using generative AI components, you have different techniques nowadays. So you want to make sure. So the first thing here is generative AI. Just 3 years ago, they launched it, and everybody was
Hmm.
starting to use generative AI, and it
Right.
was so authoritative that you actually believe whatever the output is creating,
Right.
right? They have false
Right.
references, and everything is like, okay, so I'm just going to create a PDF version of this and then just send it to whoever is asking for the
Yeah.
response, right?
Right.
But then people started realizing, oh my god, it's all this is not true, it's false, I have to verify all the information before actually using it. And
Hmm.
then you have got agents, you have got RAG is like retrieve augmented generation, you have got fine
Hmm.
tuning, it's like, yes, I have to actually verify and monitor the responses.
Hmm.
So, and then guardrails also came for generative AI security. So first of
Right.
all, what I look at when I use any generative AI components is if I'm using a trusted provider generative AI model, right? That is very
Hmm.
essential because if so I don't want to name any models, but there is a recently released generative AI model which was creating very biased outputs, right? So see, you don't want that bias or you don't want toxicity in your
Right.
outputs. So you have
Right.
to choose very carefully what is the model that you are going to use, because that is going
Hmm.
to be your baseline. Then
Right.
then perhaps you need to use your own guardrails, because even if that is a trusted provider and it has its own embedded guardrails, you want to use
Hmm.
guardrails for filtering inputs. Maybe you are a business and you've created a generative AI application for HR. So
Hmm.
you want to filter inputs from your internal employees saying, okay, uh, don't let them ask about I don't know, any other things rather than just HR, like what is
Mm-hmm.
my salary. Or you want to also filter, you want to also make sure that the prompts are only related to HR questions, right? That is the input filtering.
Right.
And you want to, maybe there is also a marketplaces with different AI guardrails now. And
Mm-hmm.
also for output, you don't want that a model to create biased output. You don't want it to be toxicity.
Mm-hmm.
And you also want to be very careful about PII, sensitive data. So if I ask, it's a HR generative application. If I ask about my salary, imagine that it's giving information about the whole department. I don't want that, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have that input output filtering in place. You also want to make sure the next thing is context. So context is basically, yes. So you want to have that context to the this baseline model, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not about using any generic model. You want to give that context about your business. Maybe you are using a model for, let's say, for travels, but you want your schedules, your flights, everything to be in place. You want that customized model, right? That context in place.
Mm-hmm.
So these three, let's say these three are the main points that I'm actually looking at. And then
Mm-hmm.
the fourth is, let's say, post production. It's monitoring and validating always. So the confidence score, it's 80%. Okay, if it's 80, it's less than 80%, then I need someone to review it. But it also depends, because if you are using it for DevSecOps, I
Mm-hmm.
always want a human to review that response, right?
The code
Yes.
that's getting generated, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's basically monitoring. So you have to have that monitoring in place to adapt your generative AI models.
Hmm.
And if you are, sorry, just last thing. And if you are just starting with generative AI, there is a learning curve. So even
Yeah.
I had to start, like, okay, what do I need to do? You need to find your technique for that generative AI model to create the outputs for you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, again, the structure of the response was amazing. So starting with the model, like what model you are using, use a trusted model where you have enough confidence, which is not generating biased output and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. Then you do input validation. Similarly, you do output validation in a
Yep.
way. One thing that you touched on is the score, right? Like if it is less than 80%, then maybe you need to redo certain things.
Yep.
Now when it comes to, so you touched on output and I want to take a little deeper into it. So earlier you mentioned that generative AI applications are not predictive, like these are not like not predictable, right?
Mm-hmm.
They provide non-deterministic output, and you want to make sure that the output that you provide is also safe. You are not generating toxic content and things like that. So how do you think about securing that aspect, the output aspect of it, so that you are generating trustworthy or safe content rather than like harmful content? What measures do you take?
So, so so there are different techniques. So first of all, you can like use these guardrails that I was mentioning before. Those are in the markets, that AI guardrails, right? So
Hmm.
those can filter like harmful context, insults, bias, toxicity. That can be filtered, and that can be even masked, or you decide what to do, right? If you want it,
Hmm.
and even you can decide like what score of filter do you want to do in each kind of these sections, right? um and even if you have that, if you have that in place, what I recommend is actually using, if you have a business,
Hmm.
if I have a business, I wouldn't use a baseline model. What I would do is use something, I would start to use something called this RAG, what I was talking before, right? Retrieval
Hmm.
augmentation generation. So it is basically connecting my AI models to live organizational data. It's
Hmm.
customer databases, document repositories, financial systems, HR records. So I've got
Hmm.
all that in place, but I have to make sure that there is also authorization, there is
Hmm.
permissions, that AI is only accessing to the data that is necessary to that user, right?
Hmm.
But it is also making sure that the AI model is only responding to the data that I have approved beforehand.
Right.
right? Because it's not like, yeah, okay, but for example, if you take just like a baseline model, foundation model, it can
Mm-hmm.
take any data because it is trained in, let's say the whole internet data, right? But if I
Mm-hmm.
am a business, I want it to be very specific to my business data. I don't want the
Mm-hmm.
whole internet data. It doesn't make sense even. And I want to make sure that the data that is being provided is true, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can use my databases and my customer data and my document repositories, financial systems, HR records, whatever I have, with the correct authorization and permission in place to create that true data. If that is not working for you, or you don't have that database or whatever, then you can also
Mm-hmm.
do what is called fine tuning. Fine tuning is like
Mm-hmm.
next level, right? So you have that baseline model, you have your data. What you do is like, you do the fine tuning. So the baseline model is much more scoped now to your data. So, but here there also you are making sure that the model is only using data from what you have approved beforehand, right? But always taking into account permissions and authorization.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and also now it's like we have got these MCP servers, and I cannot live without MCP servers. But we have
I know.
to, yeah, but you have to be very careful with MCP servers because
Right.
you have to have that list of, yes, I authorize you only to use these servers and not go to, because yeah, internet is crazy, right? There are so many things that you don't know if it is true or not. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to have that limited, also MCP servers. But yeah, that is also another thing that I am now actually using a lot, because it's like, yeah, anything I want to verify, it's actually from some official documentation, and I'm
Right.
relying on that official documentation. Yeah.
Right, right. No, you're right. Like, there have been recently many news articles about MCP servers getting hacked and exfiltering data and things like
Yeah.
that. So yeah, yeah, you are absolutely correct. So speaking of data, sometimes when you train either using the RAG approach or the fine tuning approach, if an organization doesn't have enough data, they sometimes rely on synthetic data generation, right?
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts about that? Like, is that a good approach to train your models, or maybe organizations should stay away from synthetic data generation altogether?
Um, so synthetic data is also, it's also dangerous, let's say, as in security perspective, because it depends on the trained data. So we have to go a very way back to when the model was created. So let's say I'm a business. So normally I don't train data from train model from scratch, right? I usually
Hmm.
use a foundation model that is already pre-trained. But
Right.
do we know the model that has been pre-trained, what is the data that it has been used, right?
Hmm.
But we have to make sure that that model that I have trained, if I have trained it, or even the providers, when creating synthetic data, is not biased. It can create biased data, right? Because
Right.
depending on what data I have used to train that model, it can create
Hmm.
biased data. It can even create that synthetic data using real data from the customer's data. So because it is trained on those data, right? It may be not
Hmm.
exactly the same customer data, but it can create something similar to customer data. Maybe it
Hmm.
has some sensitive information, it has some PII information. So sensitive data, yes, it's totally valid to use generative AI models, but always taking in mind that if you train from scratch those models, what
Hmm.
is the data that you are actually training that model? Because synthetic data will take that as reference, right, to create those
Hmm.
models. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. And like the example that you gave earlier, right? If you're building an HR application, you start with a baseline model, you customize, and if you think about generating synthetic data, it could have uh, a bad impact as well. So you spoke about validating the data, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
whether it is generating biased or not, and trustworthy or not. Is there a way you validate that? How do you validate and fine tune that?
You mean validating the training data or the output?
Mhm. The output.
So so there are different techniques to validate data. So the the system that normally people use or the technique is monitoring, right? So when you train a generative AI applications, what you have to do is monitor. So you have seen, so if you have used any application, generative AI application, you have always got that feedback button, right? The response is good, it's bad, or additional comments.
Right.
So previously you have to actually do it like internal testings and validation, like if the outputs are actually what I have programmed it for, right? and
Mhm.
um, so the validations approach actually shifts from rule based. Does this match expected format to pattern based and contextual? So is this appropriate, accurate, and safe given the context? You also need like real time monitoring because AI outputs can't be pre validated like traditional application responses, right? So
Mhm.
additionally, AI outputs often require human judgment. So all those
Right.
these thumb ups, thumbs down comments are human judgment for final validation,
Mhm.
especially in sensitive domains like healthcare, legal, or financial services. You even have to you don't you even have to think about what I was saying before, like authorization, permissions, because the same permissions can be applied to, for example, a nurse, or the
Mhm.
receptionist, or the doctor, right? Because it
Mhm.
has PI information, it has a health information, it has information about patients that can be very very sensitive, right? So this means implementing human in the loop workflows,
Mhm.
stabilizing clear escalation procedures for edge cases, and also maintaining audit trails that capture both automated and human validation decisions. Um, Also, another important thing is, so in traditional apps, for example, this is also this should be also part of validation. Is um when your traditional apps like stopped working, let's say, or
Mhm.
it crashes or whatever, you have some playbook, right? Okay, so
Right.
restart the application, you have a follower technique or whatever. But what happens if the I have a generative application, weather application, and it is starting to give financial advice? So what should I do in that case? It's not
Right.
only about, so who should be the primary contact?
Mhm.
How should we disable that AI application? So the approach is different, and the testing and validation should be taken in account from the starting of the I would say even the designing, right? Starting from the
Mhm.
data governance. Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. So, I like how you gave those examples, right? So those make sense. Like if it is healthcare, and you do not have enough guardrails in place,
Yep.
or you are generating synthetic data, this all could lead to challenges for you. So having that real time monitoring, the data governance that you spoke about, would help immensely. Now, with all of this, a lot of investment needs to be done, right? Like you have to have executive buy-in, you need to make sure your leaders are aligned when you are investing in building a generative AI application or deploying it to production and things like that. From a uh, advisory strategic advisory perspective, what are some of the questions that you generally ask your security leaders when considering a major investment or deploying or building or designing a generative AI application?
Um, if you think about a strategic perspective or different
Mm-hmm.
personas in an organization, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
can't. So if I'm talking with a CISO, I can't. Maybe it's not the most the conversation. If I start talking about prompt injection, and if I start talking about, maybe he'll say, "What are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about."
Mm-hmm.
But if I say like. If I ask him, maybe, can you tell me exactly what data your AI can access, or if you are using this application, what is the data that is being exposed? Then maybe the question is something different, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the approach of talking about generative AI
Mm-hmm.
security is totally different to the persona. So So right now, in the present, I talk more about generative AI security with development and
Hmm.
deployment teams. So
Hmm.
what I see is it is majorly being adopted in the DevSecOps area.
Right.
Uh, and generative AI, what it is allowing developers and deployment teams is to shift left the security.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
because
Hmm.
I don't have to wait until for the deployment to actually see
Correct.
if there is anything wrong. I can start
Hmm.
it from writing the code, checking my libraries, all that vulnerabilities, right? That can be
Hmm.
done in real time while I'm coding. So so what I see from now is most of the people in their businesses is trying to adopt generative AI in the development process, deployment
Right.
process, right?
Hmm.
More than generating generative AI applications. It's because I feel there is still not confidence for creating those applications,
Hmm.
um, because it's also about scaling, right?
Hmm.
Those applications. But I see it more. So CISOs, I think they see more applicability in using generative AI in more security controls like this development deployments that I was talking about. So I majorly
Right.
talk with CISOs rather than with the CTOs, CIOs. We may have different perspectives, but CISO are more focused on development, deployment, so DevSecOps basically. Yeah.
Hmm. Interesting. So one of the things that you mentioned is that there is a lot of information. There could be a lot of gaps also in understanding. So when you are speaking with, let's say, CISOs or security leaders for rolling out applications, what are some of the biggest misconceptions or blind spots that you have seen business leaders have about Gen AI security, and how are you addressing that with them?
Um. So three questions that will so actually when talking about CISO, so maybe they will so what the let's say the most asked questions which is okay, so generative AI, it sounds very complex, so like so are we ready for this? Is my business ready for this? Or is so how do I start, right? Where do I start? um, because so if you think about security, the CISO or the security teams are normally checking if the applications or the generative AI applications that they have to approve, like to go to go to market, right? Because marketing teams come, okay, we need to create an application that is using generative AI because this is good for our business or blah blah blah, right? And then security team has to go and say, okay, so how are you accessing the data? What is the data you're accessing, right? Or what are the applications that you are using, or which systems are you accessing? So from security team, the CISO's perspective is different from when you are actually creating those applications. So most executives think they are safe because they are using pre-trained models, not training their own. But when you implement like things like RAG to connect that model to your customer database or fine tune it in your on your financial data, you have just created the same data security challenges, right? Um, so and what happens if our AI makes a biased or harmful decision? This reveals whether you have accountability frameworks. If your hiring AI discriminates on your customer service, AI gives medical advice, who's responsible, right? and and also, like, how do we measure AI security risk? Traditional security has clear metrics. Like, we have got vulnerabilities patch, incidents per month, how can we need to update to next version. But AI security needs new metrics. We have to think about bias detection rates. We have to think about false information frequency, prompt injection, attempts block. So we have to also think about responsible AI, right? So so from CISO and security team, these questions force them to think like beyond traditional perimeters. Um, so if that will actually let you know, like, if the team is ready or not, because if you think about it, it's shifting totally. It's a different mindset, right? It's not about yeah. So there is this national vulnerability database, and it has published blah blah. No, it's something that you have to monitor, and you have to be in total control. It's more
Right.
about data. What is your business outcome, and how will your business be affected by this response?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it's like you're one, like unless you have the guardrails, the authorization, all of that in
Yes.
place, you're one smart prompt away from getting hacked, right? In a way, like leaking all the data from your organization, going across, going away from the boundary that you want to define. Like I'm going back to the example that you gave earlier, right? That if you are building an HR application, how are you ensuring that somebody is not asking some finance related question, or somebody is not asking what they are not authorized for? Like I'm asking for your salary instead of my own salary, right? So putting those guardrails and the authorization layers in place helps in securing your generative AI application. And maybe that's one of the misconceptions that you help work with your customers or CISOs when you have that dialogue. Now, one question is, like, for organizations who are starting with their Gen AI journey, we touched on some of these areas that you should focus on. Do you think it applies, like the same thing applies to, let's say, enterprises versus startups? Is it still the same? Would you recommend the same set of steps, or would you recommend different based on maybe the domain or the size of the company and things like that?
So even if you are a startup or enterprise customer, first of all, even with traditional machine learning, let's say, you have to start small. So start small. Don't jump into, okay, I want to create this whole palace. No, start with something, doors and windows. It's the architecture base, right? You have to start with doors and windows, and then you start building the walls, and then you create that whole house, and then you can think about palaces. So even if you are a startup, or even if you are a big enterprise business, you have to
Hmm.
think about starting very small, and then and also think about this working backwards I was talking about, right? What is it
Hmm.
that you want to achieve? Like, yeah, okay, I'm a business, I'm a startup, but I want to use generative AI for creating application. Yeah, but what is the use case, right?
Yeah.
May, so it's like so the weather forecast, let's say. Do I
Hmm.
really need generative AI? Because generative AI is what? It is generating context. But
Hmm.
but weather forecasting, you can use traditional machine learning, right? You don't need generative AI. So
Hmm.
it's what's so it's this working backwards, right? What do you need? And then you actually, maybe even the this general foundation model is valid for your use case. Only doing by specific prompts and putting guardrails in place is more than enough. You don't have to use
Hmm.
your customized data, or you don't have to do anything. So start small.
Hmm.
Whether it doesn't matter if you are startup or enterprise, great customer. It start small, and then you start building on that base, and then creating that whole a whole picture of where your company wants to go in the future.
Yeah. So you hit on a very important point, which is the use cases, right?
Yeah.
Like in 2023, 2024, like when 2023, when generative AI came, a lot of folks saw this as a new tool, and we can solve everything with this new tool, right?
Yeah.
They didn't think from the use cases perspective. They were
Yeah.
just trying to see how can I fit this new tool to my existing, let's say, product or existing problem and things like that, not thinking about what exactly we want to solve for.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a very important point that you highlighted. And I loved your recommendation of starting small. Often when we think about it of a new tool, we think about revamping the whole world, right?
Yeah.
Instead, maybe we should start small so that we get a feel of how does it work, how does it help, and then slowly expand on that.
Yeah, exactly. Also, adding to that point, I mean, so it's been 3 years already, and I'm
Hmm.
sure that in the market, so there are lots of marketplaces for generative AI. I'm sure in the marketplace there is some application that will meet your need. You don't even have to create your own application. Only that you have to validate that it is
Hmm.
a trustworthy provider. But
Right.
rather than that, maybe you don't even have to create that application from scratch. So. Yeah, start small, testing what is already there. It's the same concept as you know in the traditional world of developers, where you went to some forums and you just copy pasted the code and it's already done. Why should I write from scratch, right? So something
Right.
like that. So yeah, so for generative AI, nowadays in the marketplace, there are so many applications that are already there and specific to
Mhm.
your use case. Maybe you can use that. You don't have to create everything from scratch, right? So yeah, and so let me tell you one thing. This is my personal story. So
Sure.
I
Yeah.
started using Claude Code, right? And
Mhm.
I use CLI commands because I like it more. I don't know why I don't use like Visual Code, or I tried that, but I didn't get used to it. So I used
Mhm.
CLI command, and when I started using generative AI, I was like, wow, I can create any kind of application. Wow, I can create like whatever I want. I just need to give some instructions and that's it. And then
Mhm.
I then started and then I tried and tried and it's like, but I have to be so specific, really specific what to get done what I really need. It's like
Mhm.
babysitting that whole process, monitoring every time, validating what is being created. It's
Mhm.
like it's not that easy, because it seems like it is easy, but it's not that easy. You have to, like I was saying before, you have to monitor, validate every time, have that human review what is being created, and there is also a learning curve. I have learned
Mhm.
like how to get the most of these generative AI applications, right? So yeah, it's that in using these
No,
applications.
no, you're right. The personal story that you shared, it is very valid. Like, you get a false sense of productivity once you
Yeah,
start working with these agents, right? Because you feel like you got a new tool, you can do anything and everything, and you get sort of lost in that.
yeah,
Um and you start doing things which maybe you were not supposed to do, or you didn't even have like focus to work on, right?
yeah,
You wanted to do something else. Now with this new tool, with the prompts, with the response, you sort of drift away from maybe your original use case that you were trying to solve. So yeah,
yeah,
you're right. Like, you get that false sense of productivity, and then you just continue going down that path till you realize that, hey, I already spent 3 hours but I have not reached anywhere. Then you come back and then start focusing on your own problem, right? So I have also been through that. I've also done that multiple times. Like, I've also tried with Visual Studio Code, and I ended up building a gateway which I didn't even need. I spent an entire weekend on it. I could have worked on something else, right?
yeah,
But that's how you learn. That's how you learn
yeah,
that even though you think you are productive, you're not actually being productive.
yeah.
You're just falling into the trap of it. So yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point you brought up.
Yeah, so generative AI, what I feel is like you have to have that knowledge previously. Like you can't say, "Hey, I don't know anything about, I don't know, cooking cupcakes. Just create me."
Mhm.
Maybe that is work because this is something like this is something deterministic, right? How you cook cupcakes. But let's say I have never created an application for fitness. Then I
Mhm.
do, and I just say create me application for fitness, but I have no idea like where will the application be, where will be deployed, what so all that knowledge I have to have previously, right? Because
Right.
derivative application, it will create whatever they want, what was it trained on, right? So you have to have that knowledge previously, okay, to be very specific with your instructions and what you really need, just like you
Right.
would be with a developer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yes.
no, that's a valid point. Yeah, and thank you so much for bringing that up. And that's a great way to end the security questions section. Thank you so much, Sweta, for the fun conversation. Here are a few points which stood out for me. The first one is, while designing security controls for GenAI applications, few things should always be kept in mind. Its non-deterministic nature. There are different attack vectors versus traditional applications, and the semantic validation for output rather than the traditional way of validating the output. The second one is, some of the basics of GenAI application architecture are like picking the right model from trusted provider, validating not only input but output as well. And the last one is context matters the most, because how you fine tune your model will provide context specific outputs to your end users. The last one is to use utilize guardrails for input and output, and have authorization in place for data access, and feedback loop is key for adjusting bias in the output. Thank you. But before we end the podcast, I have one last question. Do you have any learning recommendation for our audience? It could be a blog or a book or a podcast or anything.
So there is what really helped me was this OAS top 10 for large language model applications that you mentioned in the beginning of the podcast. So it really
Hmm.
helped me a lot, because this is like changing your mindset of what are the security vulnerabilities that can be in using these LLMs, right? And
Hmm.
about agents, about the data leakage that can happen, how to protect my business from all this wasp, right? So yeah, that was a very very recommended recommend read for
Hmm.
anyone who is interested in this topic. And there is one that I have not seen in, or I have not actually looked for anything, because this has helped me a lot. So I will just, it's called Securing Generative AI, an introduction to generative AI security scoping matrix.
Scoping metrics.
Yeah, so this is a blog from AWS, and
Hmm.
so depending on what type of generative AI application you are actually using. So let's say if you are using a SaaS application, generative
Hmm.
SaaS application, you can't do anything about the trained data, right? The pre-trained models, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, so it's a very nice blog, and you can also start with that. I can paste it here, the link.
Oh, that will be helpful. Thank you.
Here you go. And yeah, you can start with these two, and then it's a good starting point for reading about generative AI security controls. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. So when we'll publish the episode, we'll add it to the show notes so that our audience can go and learn from there as well.
Okay, sure.
Uh, yeah. With that, we come to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much, Sweta, for joining and sharing how organizations should think about Gen AI, building on Gen AI, and also the security aspects of Gen AI.
Mhm.
So thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me, really, Peru. Thank you.
Absolutely. And to our audience, thank you so much for watching. See you in the next episode. Thanks.
Thank you.